Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm filming a non-spoilery review for a book that was released today, the day I'm filming this, January 19th, 2021, and that book is The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. So the book's publisher is Orbit, and I got an eARC through NetGalley, so thank you so much to the publishers and NetGalley for giving me the opportunity to read this and review this just in time for its release. This is the first book in the Rook and Rose trilogy. It's an adult fantasy. It's pretty lengthy. Goodreads has it at like 670 pages. I think the website Orbit has it at like 680. Either way, it's a pretty lengthy book. Before I start talking about the book, the author M.A. Carrick is actually a duo pen name for Alec Helms, which is the author of the Missy Masters duology. I personally never read it, but I'm pretty sure that's their more popular publication. And the other author is Marie Brennan, who is more well known for her Memoirs of Lady Trent series, which I have read the first book in that series and I really enjoyed it, so I'm glad that I'm continuing to support this author. Again, this is a non-spoilery review, no spoilers here. The book is released January 19th. I think that's all the important information. So before I go into detail, my overall thoughts is this is a really great start to the series. I really enjoyed it. If I had to give it a star rating, 4 out of 5 stars. It's really fun. It's very long but very easy to get through. I totally recommend. If that's all you're looking for, feel free to like skip out on the rest of the video. I would recommend. I liked it. So a lot happens in this book, but I want to give like the most like bare bones summary of this book, because if I go into detail about any of the like major plot points, it might reveal a spoiler or something, because a lot of stuff happens. What I will say is that this book revolves around our main character Ren, who is a con artist. She has lived most of her life like hustling and like pickpocketing and like living on the streets. She's very familiar with like the life of the life of crime. At the beginning of the book, Ren and her sister Tess are attempting the most difficult, most elaborate con of their lives. Ren is attempting to pose as this long lost cousin from this noble family in hopes that they like open their good graces to her, and like she's hoping that by being part of this family that she will have access to money. They are a noble family, and a lot of these families are very wealthy, in hopes that she and her sister will have a very comfortable life. However, Ren is not the only person in the city that is planning things, doing bad stuff, and she's like caught in the middle of this giant elaborate web of deceit and lies and conniving people. So this world of like nobility that Ren is trying to like infiltrate and be a part of is a world of like bureaucracy and drama and politics. So from the get-go, there's less like typical like action, battles and all that kind of stuff. Not really a lot of that. It's a lot of subtle drama and plot progression. It's not going to be this like high octane like energy, if that makes sense. I've already touched on a few characters. Ren is our main character. More than half of the book is from her perspective. I also mentioned she's a con artist. I was worried that Ren was going to be this like flat, one-dimensional character. She's just the con artist who puts her mind before her emotions. She's not she's really cut off from that part of herself, and I'm personally not really interested in those types of characters right now. I don't like this like cold hard facade of a character. They don't really intrigue me. I think they're a little too like stereotypical for me. From the get-go, we do see who and what Ren really holds close to her heart. She's not just this like ice woman. She's very smart and she's very determined, but she's also not like a robot or anything. She's realistic, and I like that. I was also worried that she was just gonna be this smart, sly character that always has a get out of jail free card up her sleeve, that she was just too smart. And she is smart, but we do get to see her like fail, and we do get to see her kind of trip up sometimes. But we also do see her strengths and deception with people. And it was really great to see like her finessing so many people to get what she needs, seeing how she can get what she can get through just being a really good like people person. Our next character is Captain Gray Serado, who is essentially like a captain in the city's like police force. He's like basically a cop. He's from like this ethnic group that is kind of looked down upon and seen as like a secondary citizen, and despite the fact that he is a captain, he has like a good position, like a higher position than a lot of people. He's still not treated well, and he's not really respected a lot, and he's like that type of cop that goes into this police force, this organization, in hopes to like make it better and make the city better, but he's only like one person and it's very difficult for him. Like, that's like his story. I expected to see more from him because he's like one of the main characters, and don't hate him or anything, but I just feel that his story was so focused on his own like arc and his own like story, his own plot. I think seeing him interact in situations that would have been out of his wheelhouse would have been better for the reader to kind of just experience different sides of him, because his story and what he's like working on in this book is very much like his narrative, and I just wanted to see him in more stuff, maybe interacting with other like minor characters that he wouldn't otherwise be interacting with. I just would have wanted more from him. But he's not bad, I just needed more from him to like care and be really invested in him. And our third main character is Derossi Vargo. He is our like crime lord, crime boss of the city. I believe he's a drug smuggler for the most part, but he has like a lot of, ventures, and he's trying to go like legitimate at the start of the story. My feelings for him are kind of like the opposite from our previous character, Gray. I was never like fully sure what Vargo's like intentions and motivations and goals were, but we did see enough of him to like be really intrigued and to want to know more. He's very much a mystery to me, and I'm pretty sure Ren, our main character who interacts with him a lot, is also kind of like, she doesn't like really know where she lies with him throughout the book, and I think that's really like interesting. I just think that's really fun. He's a really intriguing character. I might be a little biased though, because I do like crime lords, crime bosses in like fictional media, and he's very charismatic. Seeing him interact with like a lot of characters, I just like want to know more, and I'm really interested in his character. Some minor characters that I really want to like point out really quick. Tess, which is Ren's younger sister who's helping her out with this con. Tess is posing as Ren's like maid slash seamstress. Tess is probably the easiest character to like and to love. She was the first character that I really liked. She's very dedicated and loyal to her sister. I would have liked to see her more. Obviously, she's a minor character, but I would have liked to see more of the story, more of the con from her perspective, because she's also like within her own rights like a con artist as well. But it's also really implied that this life of crime is like not what she wants out of life. I think she wants to be like, she wants to have her own like sewing fashion shop. She wants to like make clothes, and she's very passionate about that. She's a very sweet girl, and seeing the story from her perspective, or at least bits of the story from her perspective, would have been like refreshing, I think. And the last minor character that I wanted to talk about is the Rook. So there is this kind of like hooded, masked vigilante in this city. I didn't know that there was gonna be a vigilante, but I love vigilantes. And this character is obviously like an enigma to Ren, our main character, and to the reader. Throughout the book, Ren's kind of trying to figure out, it's like not her like main goal, but like throughout the book, Ren's trying to figure out who the Rook is and what are their motivations. This little subplot really kept me on like my toes. I was getting like Tuxedo Mask slash Sailor Moon vibes, but I liked it. I thought it was really fun and cool. Ren interacted with the Rook a lot, and I really liked those bits of the story. I don't want to spoil anything else, so I'll just leave that there. So let's talk about world building. This story takes place in its own universe, with its own culture, with its own like politics. Most of the story takes place in a city called Nadezhra. This is technically like a city-state, so geography plays a really big part of this story. My eARC didn't really have like maps at all, so my reading experience was kind of hampered because there was always like some sort of like reference talking about certain neighborhoods and certain parts of the city that were like impoverished, or where the wealthy people lived, and how it affects other people, and a bunch of just like a lot of details like that were talked about and thrown in, and I was kind of lost because I'm very much a visual learner, but I'm sure like the published versions will have like maps and stuff. There were so many details in this book, like details upon details upon details. I personally love that as someone who studied cultural anthropology in university. I love knowing like everything from like the cuisine, gender roles, was socially acceptable to do or say, clothing, religion, spirituality, customs, all this kinds of stuff were talked about, and not even just like the city that this story takes place in, but like neighboring countries or ethnic minorities and how they differ from other groups of people, stuff like that. There were just so many details, and that's like the best way for me to get immersed in a story. I know for some people it's like the actual plot or the characters or romance. Details for me, it really like gets me into a story. It's like my favorite part of like fantasy. I know for some people that too many details kind of just like creates clutter and you're not really sure where to like focus on. I think that's probably one thing that might hinder a reader's experience, depending on how you like your world building. If you just like it, if you only really like being told what you need to know, this book doesn't really do that. This book just like throws like an entire ethnography at you. So before you pick up this book, you might want to like prepare yourself for like a lot of world building. So there is a glossary at the back of the book that really helps the reader understand the like magic and spirituality of this world, and that was really helpful. And I know that my reading experience would have been better if I was actually referencing the glossary. I personally don't like doing that while I'm reading the book, especially for like the first time. I just like going through it, and without that glossary you might have trouble understanding especially the magic and a lot of the terms that are used. Obviously with like context clues and all that kind of stuff, you can get what's going on in the story, but the specifics of how the magic system and the spirituality works might be kind of lost on you. So that's like my only big critique as far as the world building goes. It could have just been a little more straightforward, explaining to the reader. And I like to think that I'm pretty good at picking up things in books, but some of it was lost on me without that glossary. So one thing about the world that I do want to highlight, you might see this book shelved on Goodreads as like LGBT or like queer fantasy, and the main reason for that is that this world doesn't really have this like heteronormative view. Same-sex relationships are like a non-issue. It's not even really questioned. I don't even think the concept of like sexualities, like giving labels, is like a concept in this world. We see a lot of references to marriages and relationships between same-sex couples. We also have a more prominent minor character that is a trans man. One of the authors on Goodreads said, and I hope I'm quoting this correctly, that the cultures have a complex understanding of genders that go beyond the binaries. So I just wanted to mention that that's a big part of this world, especially when it comes to like the romances and the relationships. I personally really like that. Sometimes I don't really want to see like the stress of coming out or queer trauma in a fantasy when it could just be like written out. There's a time and place for it, but it's great that in this world everyone's pretty much open with their sexuality. So the writing is pretty straightforward. It's not too like fancy, lyrical, decorative. It's told in third person, like limited perspective. More than half of the book is seen from Ren's point of view, and then we get perspectives from other characters. So I hinted about this a little bit earlier, but the first half of this book is pretty slow, simmering kind of buildup of tension. It's not super action-packed. One of my least favorite comments in reviews, and I don't mean this in a negative way if this is how you review your books, but I personally don't like seeing comments like, this book was boring, nothing happened, 1 out of 5 stars. I don't typically make those comments about books because I always think that the author is trying to accomplish something in the book, even if there's not like explosions and like sword fights and all this kind of stuff going on. The first half of the book might be like given that kind of review, but it's a lot of world building. It's a lot of establishing relationships. It's a lot of just like seeing these characters interact and slowly building up tension. It's a very slow-paced book, especially the first half. The second half definitely has more of what you would expect as like action-packed fast moving plot. People are getting kidnapped, and then there's like riots and all this kinds of stuff happens in the second half of the book. But I still think it's pretty well paced. This book is almost 700 pages, so I think we got enough build up in the first half to justify a lot of more traditional action type stuff happening in the second half. I personally like the first half more, the more like slow simmering kind of plot more. I think it took me about 4 days to get through this chunky book. One part of that is obviously I wanted to get a review out as fast as possible, but also I think it's very easy to like get through this book. I want to quickly touch on some of the relationships in this book. By far my favorite is the sister relationship between Ren and Tess. I think that this sibling relationship is great, it's healthy, and I want to see more of that in the forefront of the next installments. We know that established relationships don't really need to have a lot of like exposition, because the authors can just say, well, they've these sisters have loved each other for so long and they've been through thick and thin, then let's start the story. But I like to see more backstory with these sisters. I'd like to see more of Tess's like opinions on Ren and what she's doing, and why she believes in her so much, and all this kinds of stuff. I think it would have been very easy for Ren to feel like she's like dominant, or like the more alpha of these two sisters, and from the outside looking in it definitely looks that way, but Ren really values Tess and her contributions to this con that she's attempting. Both of these sisters care a lot about each other, and I just liked seeing this healthy sibling relationship amid all this scheming and mischievous noble rich people misbehaving. So the romance in the story feels a little different. First and foremost, it's not by any means like taking over the plot of the story. There's definitely hints of it throughout the book, but it doesn't really take up too much space from the other parts of the story. I didn't feel like the authors had like a strong preference in terms of a love interest for Ren. Throughout the book, we see Ren at least feeling physically attracted to multiple people, but I don't have the impression that the authors are going for like this kind of reverse harem romance story either. I just don't think the authors were very particular with romance. There was like a more obvious romantic interest. For example, Ren did kiss someone, and that would be a more obvious like clue as to like, oh, that's the romantic interest of the book. But like yeah, she thought they were attractive and like pretty and all that, but I didn't, as a reader, was like, I personally as a reader wasn't invested in that, because I thought she was not really focused on like a romance. I didn't think we got a lot of like romantic interest in any characters, very minor maybe at most. There could have been a number of romantic interests that the authors could have like focused on, and I wouldn't have been like mad at any of the options that Ren had, but I don't think the authors really cared to like choose like an endgame romance so obviously early on in the story, which I think is pretty normal considering most people in real life don't like meet someone and like immediately know like that's the end game romance, that's gonna be like my happily ever after book 3. So I didn't really mind that Ren was having at least physical attraction to like a few people and maybe not as much romantic interest. I think that's totally normal. Even in my notes I have this as Ren and love interest question mark, because I didn't even know that. I couldn't even say like 100% like there was a specific love interest in mind from the author's intentions. I know this might sound kind of confusing, but I thought I'd mention it. Sometimes romance drives away a reader. Sometimes romance really brings in a reader more. I guess the biggest takeaway is that the romance, or any romance, didn't really overtake the story. And at the same time, I don't really think the authors have like, or had a endgame love interest either. At least at this point in the story, I can't really pin down like who Ren will end up with, if she even does. It's not super clear right now. And without spoilers, let's talk about the ending. I like the ending. I think it wrapped up well enough. Maybe some parts of the ending was a little too nicely wrapped up, but it ended on a good note. However, we do start to see some of the threads of like what's to come next, some future maybe enemies or antagonists for Ren, and certain characters I feel like I can't put my trust in anymore. I was kind of like questioning them throughout the book, but now I'm just kind of like, what is going on? There's a little twist at the end, but it's by no means like a cliffhanger. I know some people really hate cliffhangers. I don't think it's like a big cliffhanger. I think most of like the important bits of this particular part of the story were wrapped up pretty well. Yeah, so that pretty much concludes most of my thoughts about the story. I've talked about the plot, characters, world building, writing, relationships, and the ending. Let me know if there are other things that I should cover in future reviews. Again, this is only like my second dedicated review here. As you can tell, I did enjoy this story. I would recommend it to readers that do enjoy a slow building, simmering story. I would also recommend this to readers that do like world building and the details of it all, especially at the beginning of the story, maybe not so much towards the end, but I was getting kind of like what's that story, The Lies of Locke Lamora vibes, but obviously with a female protagonist. I was getting those vibes at the beginning, maybe not so much at the end, so maybe something like that. I can't wait for the next books in the series. I think they'll be great. Thank you so much for watching. I will link all my socials down below. Feel free to like, comment, or subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.